Wednesday of the 6th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of Genesis. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the hatch he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven to see if the waters had lessened on the earth. It flew back and forth until the waters dried off from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters had lessened on the earth. But the dove could find no place to alight and perch, and it returned to him in the ark, for there was water all over the earth. Putting out his hand, he caught the dove and drew it back to him inside the ark. He waited 7 days more and again sent the dove out from the ark. In the evening, the dove came back to him, and there in its bill was a plucked off olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had lessened on the earth. He waited still another 7 days and then released the dove once more. And this time it did not come back. In the 601st year of Noah's life, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the water began to dry up on the earth. Noah then removed the covering of the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was drying up. Noah built an altar to the Lord, and choosing from every clean animal and every clean bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. When the Lord smelled the sweet odor, he said to himself, "Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the desires of man's heart are evil from the start. Nor will I ever again strike down all living beings as I have done. As long as the earth lasts, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." The word of the Lord.
Responsorial Psalm. The response is, "To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise." How shall I make a return to the Lord for all the good he has done for me? The cup of salvation I will take up, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise. My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people. Precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones. To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise. My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in your midst, O Jerusalem. To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus and his disciples arrived at Bethsaida, people brought to him a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Putting spittle on his eyes, he laid his hands on the man and asked, "Do you see anything?" Looking up, the man replied, "I see people looking like trees and walking." Then he laid hands on the man's eyes a second time, and he saw clearly. His sight was restored, and he could see everything distinctly. Then he sent him home and said, "Do not even go into the village." The Gospel of the Lord.
Wednesday of the 6th week in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from Genesis 8, 6-13, and 20-22. This account is what happened at the end of the flood. It had stopped raining, and Noah opened the hatch and sent out a raven to see if it could find dry land. It flies around and comes back because there's no dry land yet. Then he sends out a dove. Now, why first a raven, then a dove? Again, this might have something to do with the fact that the dove is considered a clean animal, where the raven, which eats carrion, is considered an unclean animal. At the first attempt, the dove doesn't find any dry land, but at the next attempt, it brings back a sprig of olive in its beak, a sign that the land is drying up. When Noah exits the boat, he offers up a sacrifice to the Lord. Obviously, a passage that was taken from the priestly source, which emphasizes sacrifice, ritual purity, etc. Now, this story also appears in the Mesopotamian version of the flood, but in that version, when Atrahasis offers up a sacrifice, the gods gather around the sacrifice like hungry flies. Where in this version, it's much more spiritualized. God is very pleased when he senses the odor of this sacrifice, and he promises not to flood the earth again to destroy it. And a sign of that promise is the rainbow in the sky. This is another etiology, a story told to explain a mystery. The mystery of the rainbow. Why does it exist in the sky? It's a promise that God would not destroy the earth. The Gospel is from Mark 8, 22 to 26. Jesus arrives at Bethsaida and there's a blind man who asks to be healed. Jesus spits, puts his hands on the man and says, "Do you see anything?" The man says, "I see people, but they look like walking trees." Now, first question, if he's blind, how does he know what walking trees look like? And the response, it doesn't say that he was blind since birth. He might have lost his sight later on. So Jesus has to heal him a second time. And that always bothered me. Why does it take 2 attempts? It kind of reminds me of one of our friars who visited a nursing home, and Joe had been in a coma for 5 weeks. So he prayed that Joe would have a happy death, that God would take him home. And that instant, the alarm went off, but it was for the next bed. The friar had gotten the right intensity of prayer, but he missed on his aim. Is that what's happening with this miracle? And the answer is no. This is a miracle. This is a miracle that actually occurred, but it also represents a faith story, the faith of the disciples. When they first came to Jesus, they thought they saw clearly, but their vision of what it meant to be Messiah was distorted. They were only thinking of what they could get out of it. It's only at the cross, that second intervention, that they understood clearly. That represents the faith of the disciples, the faith of the family of Jesus. Now realize, there is another faith miracle in the gospel, when Jesus curses the fig tree and it dries up because it didn't bear fruit. Well, it shouldn't have borne fruit because Jesus was passing by in April. Fig trees in Palestine bear fruit in September, October. It was only following God's will by not bearing fruit. But the message was, Jesus came out of season in a way that the Pharisees didn't expect. The fact that they refused to bear fruit meant that they would dry up and wither. There are 2 faith miracles in this gospel. Either you can get it wrong at first and then eventually get it right, or you never get it right. There's no one in this gospel who gets it right from the start. And that's a real consolation, because it means that when we have our doubts, when we're confused, God understands, and God will give us the chance to grow in our faith. It's only when we totally reject the love of God that we're like that dried up fig tree that would never bear fruit. And may God bless us.